I want to start today with a feeling a lot of people recognize, even if they don't talk about it out loud. There's a Reddit post I kept thinking about while I was making this video. I found it while I was doing research on other topics. A user describes spending their Saturday angry, grinding an endless multiplayer loop, and realizing they just need to put it down for a while. Then they say something really simple. Single player games, or games with an ending, are where they feel real satisfaction again. That reaction isn't rare, it gets echoed constantly. You don't have to hate multiplayer to relate to this. You can love a game and still feel it. You can still feel worn down by it. So what is it about the endings that changes the emotional shape of play? In stories, there's a concept called denouement. It's the aftermath. The part where loose ends settle. The part where the story stops demanding your attention and you finally get to understand what it meant. Even if the ending is bittersweet, it gives the experience a clean edge and a place to rest. Psychology has a parallel idea, meaning making. It's the way people turn experiences into something coherent, something that fits inside their personal story. One reason endings matter is that they help you package what happened. They give you a point where reflection feels natural instead of forced. And there's another piece here, the desire for cognitive closure. Some people feel more comfortable when things resolve, when ambiguity shrinks, when the "what happens now" pressure ends. Researchers describe it as a preference for predictability, structure, decisiveness, and discomfort with lingering uncertainty. Then there's a classic effect that gets cited here a lot, the Zeigarnik effect. Unfinished tasks can stick in your head more than finished ones. It's not proof that games trap you, but it's a useful lens for why open loops can feel mentally sticky. When a game ends, your brain gets permission to stop holding it. When a game keeps going, your brain doesn't get that signal. So the loop we've established is simple. Endings don't just conclude content, they change how we remember time. They turn play into something you can look back on, instead of something you're still inside. And that leads to the next question. If endings give us meaning and closure, why did games start deprioritizing them? If endings create closure, then here's the pivot. Modern games learned that they could give you the feeling of closure in smaller pieces. Not through the credits, but done through progress. There's a concept called the goal gradient hypothesis. Motivation increases as you get closer to a reward. The closer done feels, the harder people push. That's a more powerful idea in games because progress can be made visible on command. XP bars, rank ladders, battle pass tiers, gear score, prestige levels. When the bar moves, your brain registers forward motion, even if the story itself is standing still. You see it everywhere. Just one more match and I finish this tier. Just a few more dailies and I hit the next rank. I'm so close to the reward, I can't stop now. The system keeps offering near completion, and near completion keeps pulling you forward. This is where the tone of modern design changes. A narrative ending used to be the main finish line. Progression systems offer dozens of smaller finish lines instead, stacked one after another. And when people talk about this feeling becoming more common, it's worth grounding it in who players actually are. The ESA's 2025 data shows gaming is a broad and mainstream, with men and women participating at roughly similar rates. It's about 52% men and 47% women in their headline split. So these systems aren't niche anymore, they shape how a huge slice of people experience games. A useful quote to frame the tension here comes from Chris Wilson, a Grinding Gear Games co-founder and co-creator of Path of Exile, speaking critically about dark patterns in modern design, especially when behavioral tactics become more central than fun. He states, "When I was growing up, games were designed to be fun, not manipulative. They didn't have literal behavioral scientists and psychologists on staff trying to rewrite my brain, and that the primary victims of dark patterns are the players themselves." You don't have to agree with every part of that critique to take the point. Games increasingly compete on retention, and progression is one of the cleanest retention tools ever invented. Endings used to mark completion. Now many games substitute layered progress for narrative finality. It keeps players moving. Which raises the next question. If progress replaces endings, what happens when progress becomes tied to time? Once games leaned on progression, the next evolution was inevitable. Progress becomes structured by calendars. Daily resets, weekly challenges, seasonal cycles, limited windows. This is where progress stops being something you finish at your pace and starts becoming something you keep up with. You miss a day, your momentum stalls. Miss a week, rewards expire. Miss a season, and that content rotates away. That shift changes the emotional posture of play. It adds a quiet kind of pressure. Not always dramatic, sometimes subtle, yet it builds. To explain why it works, psychology gives us a clean vocabulary. Operant conditioning, reinforcement schedules, reward timing. Basically the idea that behavior can be shaped by consequences and patterns of reward delivery. Games can distribute rewards on predictable schedules or stagger them in ways that feel more uncertain and compelling. And because the rewards are tied to time windows, the cost of skipping doesn't look like I didn't do this activity, it looks like I lost access. A really useful research anchor here is Daily Quest or Daily Pest, a paper that looked at engagement rewards like daily logins and similar systems. It's not a moral panic paper, it's more nuanced than that. Some players experience these rewards as helpful, others find them annoying, and some describe them as obligation-like. That nuance matters because it shows this isn't one universal reaction, it's a whole spectrum. The same system can feel like structure to one player and pressure to another. Progression used to be a path forward. Time-gated progression turns it into a schedule. The game stops waiting for you. And once time becomes a container for progress, the next step is bigger than psychology, because time-gated progress fits perfectly into a business model. By the time progression systems had replaced endings as the primary way games organized play, something else had shifted alongside them. Games had become expensive. Modern AAA titles routinely stretched across years of development. Teams grew larger, production pipelines became more complex, the cost of releasing a single game carried more risk than ever. For a long time, games were designed around a single moment of exchange. Value changed hands once, at the start, everything that followed existed inside that decision. That structure held as long as games were small enough to stand on their own. As production scaled, it became harder to rely on that moment alone. Under those conditions, finishing a game cleanly began to feel less like a design endpoint and more like a financial vulnerability. Studios needed ways to extend value beyond release. They needed systems that could support ongoing development, ongoing updates, and ongoing engagement without requiring a product each time. This is where the industry's focus began to drift, away from resolution and towards continuity. Subscription models were one of the earliest signs of that shift. Games like RuneScape and World of Warcraft tied revenue directly to time spent inside the game. By early 2020, World of Warcraft alone had generated more than $8 billion in lifetime revenue, largely through recurring subscriptions rather than box sales. Time inside the game had become monetizable. Free-to-play models pushed that logic even farther. By removing the upfront price, games dramatically expanded their potential audience. Industry data shows that free-to-play titles accounted for roughly 78% of global revenue by 2020, despite most players never spending money at all. A small percentage of users generated the majority of revenue through optional purchases. Under this model, finishing a game was no longer the goal, remaining inside it was. As monetization evolved, design priorities followed. Microtransactions introduced spending into the moment-to-moment experience. Cosmetic items, progression boost, convenience features allowed players to invest without ever reaching a stopping point. When Bethesda released Paid Horse Armor in 2006, the controversy wasn't about the item itself, it was about what it represented. Post-launch engagement had become part of the product. Live service models formalized that shift. Games were no longer built to be shipped once and slowly fade. They were designed to update continuously. Seasons replaced finales, roadmaps replaced conclusions, content cycles replaced closure. By the early 2020s, live service titles dominated player attention. Industry estimates suggest there were over 2 billion PC gamers worldwide, while traditional pay-to-play games accounted for fewer than 500 million. Engagement, not ownership, had become the defining metric. Retention became central. Studios tracked daily active users, session length, engagement rates. These metrics shaped internal dashboards, investor communications, and long-term planning. In 2021 alone, companies like Activision Blizzard reported earning nearly 3 times more revenue from in-game purchases and subscriptions than from the initial product sales. What players stayed with mattered more than what they finished. Endgame systems fit neatly into this structure. They offered progression without resolution, optimization without finality, raids, gear, seasonal ranks, and battle passes extended play while avoiding a clean endpoint. From a systems perspective, this approach worked. A game that ended cleanly created drop-off, a game that continued indefinitely sustained value. Over time, these structures stopped being optional. Production cycles aligned with seasonal updates, monetization aligned with progression systems, design aligned with engagement metrics. The game itself became an ecosystem shaped as much by economic realities as by creative intent. This wasn't about tricking players into staying forever, it was about building systems that could function indefinitely. And that's where the shift becomes clear. When games stopped organizing themselves around endings, they didn't become empty, they became efficient. As games expanded, advancement became legible in new ways. Numbers went up, systems deepened, mastery revealed itself through efficiency and execution rather than closure. What mattered was how well you played within the system, not whether you reach the edge. If modern games are built to sustain themselves through systems rather than stories, what does progress mean once there's nothing left to finish? So endings resolve stories. Progression systems do something else though. They optimize. Once narrative stopped being the primary endpoint, games didn't just become longer, they became directional. They stopped asking whether you reached a conclusion and started asking whether you can improve. Builds can get better, rankings can climb, execution can become cleaner. This kind of progress doesn't point towards a finish line, it points towards better, and better is always a target that can move. You can see this in the way modern play organizes itself around optimization culture. Speedruns, meta builds, tier lists, all the discourse about what's best in slot today, the systems begin to matter as much as the narrative because the system is what stays relevant when the story is done. A solo legendary run in the Division 2 isn't about completion, the credits already exist. It's about mastery, it's about refinement, it's about pushing performance closer to an ideal that never fully arrives. And when games are built around seasonal updates, optimization becomes even more natural. The target keeps shifting. A new weapon enters the loot pool, a balance pass adjusts the meta, a new season introduces a different ladder. The system stays familiar while the best answer changes. This is part of why these structures scale so well. Optimization doesn't need narrative resolution. It adapts across seasons. It survives live updates. It fits progression ladders and ranked ecosystems. From a design perspective, it's structurally efficient. The game can keep producing goals without writing endings. Instead of wrapping up the experience, the system keeps offering refinement. It gives players a reason to return without requiring a new conclusion. But it changes the emotional shape of play. A story ending gives you a place to land. Optimization gives you a direction to keep moving. And when better becomes the dominant endpoint, stopping doesn't feel like finishing, it feels like stepping away mid-process. That's not necessarily a bad thing, rather it's a description of the trade-off. Modern systems are extremely good at sustaining engagement. They keep games alive. They keep communities active. They keep goals available. They also change what progress means. So the question that remains isn't whether endless systems are good or bad, it's what happens when a medium built on endings gradually reorganizes itself around optimization instead.